All right, we're going to go ahead and continue on with our lesson here. It's on page 655, lesson 98. Here it talks about the zero product property, meaning you set the whole equation equal to zero, meaning there's a zero on one side, you move everything else to the other side. And then when you factor, you have these binomials there, and you set each of the binomials equal to zero. So let's do number one. Here, we have two binomials. It's set equal to zero. Everything moved on one side. So therefore, you go ahead and set each of these equal to zero, and you solve for x. So when we do that, we have x minus 4 equals 0. You move the 4 over. You get x is equal to 4. For this one, you move the 5 over. You have x is equal to negative 5. Remember, you're moving over, so you're changing the signs for them. So your two answers, 4, negative 5, negative 5, 4, whichever one. There's brackets because they name sets of numbers. And parentheses names of coordinates, so x comma y. In this case, you need brackets, or just put the numbers by itself. Just put 4 comma negative 5. Next one, we have to make sure zero product property. Make sure everything's moved to one side. So now, when we do that, we get x squared plus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. It has to be in descending order, the square, the x, and then the constant there. The constant cannot add to any of these numbers. It's like adding like terms. There are no like terms to add. From this step, you go ahead and factor. Factors of negative 8 that give you positive 2, and that would be 4 and negative 2. 4 minus 2 gives you positive 2, so those are your factors. So it's x plus 4, x minus 2 equals 0. Now, set each of them equal to 0. X plus 4 equals 0. X minus 2 equals 0. And then solve for x. Subtract 4 to both sides. Here, you add 2 to both sides. And you have your answer as being negative 4 and 2. Next one here for B, this one gets a little bit more complicated, but we'll go step by step, is solving for them when the A is greater than 1. So in this case, A is 7. So remember, AX squared plus BX plus C, the number is greater. But before we do any of that, we have to make sure all the numbers and variables are moved to one side, so we can get a 0 on one side. So now, I have 7x squared. I have a negative 19x. I have a minus 6. And set all of this equal to 0. Now let's go ahead and start factoring. You can't factor out a number. You can't factor out a variable, so you can't do the factoring common factor way. But we can go ahead and factor with a being greater than 1. And it's the factoring. Make sure you go back to your lessons. We did this like 2 weeks ago on how to factor this way. So you multiply a times c, which will give you 7 times negative 6. It will be negative 42. Find factors of negative 42 that equal b. B is considered negative 19. So you find different factors. There's lots of factors of negative 4, but when you add it together, you get negative 19. And if you divide negative 42 by 2, you get 21 and 2. So 21 and 2. It's a negative, so meaning one of the factors is a negative. So in this case here, a 21 has to be negative because negative 21 plus 2 gives you the negative 19 when you add it together. So that sign in front makes a big difference. So the next step is you bring down your first term, so 7x squared. You bring down your last term, negative 6. And then your two terms are going to be the two factors that you solve for. So this will be negative 21x. This will be positive 2x. So you bring them down. And when you bring them down, now we can factor the first two and the second two. So again, if you don't know where I am, if you're completely lost, make sure you go back to your book and go back to that lesson because we already discussed about this before. Now, you factor the first two, factor the second two. A number you can factor out is 7 and x. They both have 7, they both have at least an x, so you have x minus 3. Here, 2 and 6, you can factor out a positive 2. So make sure to always put the sign in front of the number, whether it's positive or negative. And when I factor out that 2, I get x minus 3. Now we can factor something out. If we factor out an x minus 3, because each of the terms have it, there's two terms here. They each have an x minus 3, you're left with a 7x plus 2. And that's your answer here. So x minus 3 times 7x plus 2, but remember we're trying to solve for what x is. Now, let's go ahead and set each of these equal to 0. They have it the other way, meaning this is first, this is second. Honestly, it doesn't matter. You just need some right answers for x. If you set each of them equal to 0, x minus 3 equals 0, you're going to get x by itself, x is equal to 3. Here, 7x plus 2 equals 0. You're going to get this by itself, so you're going to subtract 2 to both sides. You're going to have 7x is equal to negative 2. Divide both sides by 7, and you have x is equal to negative 2 over 7. So your two answers would be 3 and negative 2 over 7. So if it's a fraction, it's okay. Next one here. We have a lot of things going on. We have terms on one side and the other side. We have to make sure we move all the terms on one side. If we look here, the x squared, which we always want to be positive, is negative here. So if we move this over to this side, so I'm going to do opposite sign, so plus 2x squared. I move over here, this cancels out. I want one side to equal 0, so I'm also going to move this at the same step. So from this point, you should be very familiar with multi-step equations. I'm going to subtract both sides by 20. So now it's 0 is equal to, and I put everything in order. I got my 2x squared here, minus 20x here, 70 minus 20, positive 50. So again, everything's on one side, so I can rearrange them without changing their signs. That's very important. So I just rearrange it so I can have in descending order. Now I have this. Now, let's go ahead and factor. First way of factoring is greatest common factor. Here, I can factor out a number 2. They at least have a 2. So when I factor it out, I get x squared minus 10x plus 25. Next thing is, I'm not done yet. I can factor this. It's a trinomial. Look for factors of 25 that equal negative 10. And your numbers will be negative 5 and negative 5. Remember, if it's positive, both your factors are positive or both of them are negative. So now, we get 2 times x minus 5 times x minus 5. Set it all equal to 0. And now you're setting each term equal to 0. So 2 equals 0, that's an incorrect answer. There's no way you can have 2 being equal to 0. So that cancels out. X minus 5 equals 0, get the 5 by itself. Or get the x by itself, x equals 5. This is the same thing. So you have x equals 5. Whenever you have a duplicate of the same number, you just stick with the same number. You're only listing the number once. So although we have 2 5s, and later on you'll learn in Algebra 2, this is it's a duplicate number. But in this case here, we have 2x equals 5. We just want 1. So the answer is x is equal to 5. 5 is the answer. Last one. Here they talk about word problem. Here they have the length and width of a certain property of a garden. So he says the area is 51 yards. The length is 14 yards more than the width. So if I said I have $2 more than what I started with, I'm adding $2 more. So therefore it's 14 plus W. So the length is 14 more than the width. So length is equal to 14 plus W. They're asking us what is the length and what is the width of this rectangular garden. So now we have to go ahead and solve for it. According to the equation, this area is equal to length times width. We have what the area is. The area is 51. The length, we have what the length is. Instead of putting length, we can put what it's equal to. So remember, substitution from what we learned with the systems of equation. The length is equal to 14 plus W, and that's what I'm going to put there. So my length is 14 plus W. My width is just W. Next thing I do, I go ahead and multiply it out. So if I do distributive property, I get 14W plus W squared. My last step, if I notice I have a W squared, and anytime I see a W squared, I always think of factoring. I'm going to move everything over to one side. So now I have 0 is equal to W squared plus 14W minus 51. And now we can see if we can factor. We can factor. Factors of negative 51 that equal positive 14, and we end up with 17 and negative 3. So those are the two factors of negative 51. Now we set each of these as a binomial, so W plus 17, W minus 3. We set each of these equal to 0. Equals 0, W minus 3 equals 0. And then we solve for them. So for this one, we subtract both sides, and we get w equals negative 17. Here we add 3 to both sides, and we get w equals 3. So we have it set equal to 0. We go ahead and factor each one of these out, but this is not our answer. They're asking for what's the length and what's the width of that garden. So if we look here, our length and our width has to equal something. Here we have two types of numbers that we can use. Negative 17. So whenever you're doing the area problems, anything with direction or measurements, you can never have a negative number there. My side of the wall is not negative 25 feet. There's no such thing as negative 25 feet when measurements. So whenever you have a negative number when you're trying to solve for measurements, you have to cancel that out. So that means our width is equal to 3. So we have what our width is. And now we have to go ahead and find our length. Our length, if we remember from this equation, is 14 plus w. Now we have what w is. Our length is 14 plus 3, which is equal to 17. So our length is 17, our width is 3, and that's all. If you need help, make sure to email me where the Dropbox is right there. Make sure you're being diligent. Miss you guys.